Kathy, you're doing a lot. Are you hearing all right?
Yep.
Can you hear this clicking? It isn't everybody I let do that. Just kidding. Want me to go?
What can you remember?
My mother and father were both from large families in England. I don't know too much about my mother's family, except that when my mother was converted, she was an Episcopalian. But my father came from a long line of English preachers and men of God. And so my beginnings were not in England, but my parents' beginnings were in England. My dad was from the lower part of England called Cornwall. I remember from reading his memoirs that he was a young itinerant preacher, and his preaching took him to the city of Dover, England. And one day he heard a Salvation Army band, and he followed them to the Salvation Army Corps, or Citadel, whatever you call it. And that's where he learned to love the Salvation Army. And my mother was from the northern part of England, the Lake District, which was called, well, she was born in Keswick, but it was called the Lake District, a beautiful district of England. My mother was from a little town, and when she was 16 years old, she went down into the village square with a friend, and she heard a Salvation Army open-air meeting. And I believe she was quite taken with it. But her mother, who was had no interest in the early Salvation Army shenanigans, was quite appalled that her daughter was interested in the Salvation Army. I believe my dad was sent as a lieutenant to her corps in Keswick. And maybe she started, one wishes I had asked more questions when I had my mother, but I would assume that she went to the Salvation Army and met him as a, I'm not sure, but I know that my mother was, came home from training at Christmas, Salvation Army training at Christmas time because of a weakness of some kind. I think she had a weakness in her throat, and probably back then they didn't think she was well enough for Salvation Army service. So I think she might have, at this time, when my father was sent there, been a member of the Corps, and that's where they met. Mm-hmm. And they married in surrounding parts of England. Well, they were married in 1901 or 2, I believe, turn of the century. But they had left the Salvation Army officership because of the rules and regulations at that time. They were not allowed to marry, so they left officership, but retained their soldiership in Toronto.
So then they had Joseph
Edgar, and Elizabeth Alice, I believe. A year and several years after they were married. Through the Salvation Army, somehow they found out about relocating in Canada, and they went to Canada, where my third sibling was born, Florence. And they stayed there about 8 years in Canada. I remember, I think he played in the Dover Court Band, and he may have been a carpenter, I'm not sure.
So then how did they end up as officers in America?
It was World War I, around 1915, and maybe the Army had heard about my dad having been to training college in England, and they wrote to him, offering him, because there was a shortage of officers in the United States, offered him a place to serve and become an officer in the United States. So he was sent to Milton, Pennsylvania, to open the work there. And that was 1915. I was not born in Milton. I was born in Williamsport. Williamsport. Because my mother had gone there to be with a friend who would take care of her.
You were born in 1918.
Yes, in June 1918, right around the end of the war. And I remember early days in Erie, Pennsylvania, Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. And then my dad was transferred to Manchester, Connecticut when I was 10 years old.
Manchester was a pretty big corps, right?
Yes, it was. It had a wonderful band and soldiers, and I remember visiting with my parents a lot of the people of the corps, and it was a small town at that time. And with my friends, I was able to wander all around the town and enjoy a very peaceful existence. I suppose I played the normal kids of that day games, hopscotch, jacks, those kind of games. My girlfriend's father had a bakery, and I remember going over to her house and going down into the bakery, and she would pull out a big tray, and there would be cookies inside. So that was one of my memories there. From there, we went to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we were there 2 years. Another corps with a big band, and one of the thrills I had was on a Sunday night, my girlfriend, Mary Scheinfeld, she became Mary Moody. She and I, with full uniform, would march in front of the band, and I think we had a flag, and each had a flag, to the open air meeting. And so I went to elementary school in Manchester and Cambridge. And I spent my first year of high school in Cambridge. And then we had a blow in our family. My father got transferred from a big corps to a small corps in Ohio called Athens. And it was I was 15, it was very difficult. It was during the Depression, and my mother and dad had to go out to collect money, and my dear mother was starting to get old and had to walk around with a tambourine, and my dad and I would play the cornets together. And I'm sure I didn't like it. I'm sure I didn't enjoy it. And probably sometimes in the open air meeting, I would kind of hide behind somebody in case anybody saw me with those people, those people in uniform. But then, from then on, it was a matter of changing from one city to another. And from Athens, I went with my parents to Lima, Ohio, where I graduated from high school. And from there to Springfield, Ohio, that's where I left for training school, Salvation Army training school. I was 20 years old, and I had helped my dad and mother in the Corps to some extent with vacation Bible school and things like that. Yeah, I was 15 years old, and I had seen probably the only movie I had ever seen was in school. And the first time I saw one, I was amazed. But in Athens, there was a boy and a girl that we must have been visiting, and they took me to see Peg O' My Heart. And that was such a revelation to me. It was such a beautiful picture. And when I was little, I would say to my dad, "May I go see the Ten Commandments?" And he said no, he didn't think that Hollywood was a good place to make movies. And he not only didn't encourage me, but he forbid me to go to movies. So I did sneak out, and I probably felt very guilty, but I enjoyed it. Oh, Bill Jennings. Well, there again, I was a sneaky kid. I snuck out behind our quarters, got my first kiss, and we, I guess you call it, went together off and on. When I first met him, it was in the hallway of the high school, and he gave me a little card that I kept for many years. And it said, "Our eyes have met, our lips not yet, but oh, you kid, I'll get you yet." So we had kind of a relationship for a couple years. And then he joined the National Guard. So naturally, I felt bad. He was going away. So I went down to the station and saw him hugging and kissing another girl. And that was the end of my big romance. I was pretty sure I was devastated for about 5 minutes.
Now, wasn't there something else I remember, something about being on a ship? You went on a cruise with your parents?
You are bringing up things that I didn't know I told you.
But these are things we want to remember, Mom.
Okay. Well, I was old enough to know better, but I was 18, and my parents had taken me over for my graduation to England. And on the way back, a friend that I met on the ship and I, it must have been 2 guys, sailors, invited us to their room, their cabin. And I guess I was very naive. And back then, you know, you didn't hear bad things like you hear today. But I just remember later thinking, you know, what was I doing? What a risk I took. So nothing happened except maybe they tried to give us a drink or something. I don't remember the details of it except that it was a place I never should have gone, and my parents never knew about it. And one of my well, I guess I felt during my teenage years that I was a big shot, and I was, you know, thought I was smart and things like that, and tried to, because I was a Salvationist and an officer's child, I tried to hit the edge at times and try things, you know, that other people did and that I shouldn't have done. That was that probably sounds very tame today, but it was a real something that could have been bad.
So before you went to training, did you go stay with Aunt Alice and Uncle Frank in Newburgh?
Yes.
Is that where you met Dad?
I went to Newburgh to be the assistant corps helper. And they had another girl that was going to training, Orpha Spellman. She was Ballantyne then, living with them. So we had a good time just, you know, being friends. And I don't remember much. I was there about 6 months. I don't remember much of what I did, but when we got there, this was after that trip to England. I was about 18 at Christmas time. I walked into the Newburgh Corps, and there stood this tall, lanky guy next to the piano, and he had a big patch on his chin. He had had a cyst removed, and I guess it was deep, and so he had to wear the patch a long time. Well, immediately we rubbed each other the wrong way because he was a wise guy, and I thought I was too. I thought I was a wise girl. And we kind of, you know, rubbed each other the wrong way, but at the same time, there must have been an attraction there because that's where we came to know each other and in time came to love each other.
And you ended up going to training the same year?
Same session. All 3 of us, his friend Fran, Alan, and I went to and his girl, or if I went the year before. And when I went to training, I said to Alan, well, we'll just play it cool, because I thought maybe I'd meet a guy, on a white horse, and he'd sweep me off my feet. And he says, okay. He didn't, lose any sleep over it. And so we went to training, and we just said hello to each other all through training, but never went out together. But every time I saw him talking to another girl, I didn't like it very much. But we had, from then on, we had what I call a rocky courtship. The week before commissioning, we went on a picnic to Star Lake. And we went out in a boat, and he couldn't swim.
He never did learn to swim, did he?
No, so that was quite an experience. And I guess we were just, I guess you would call it a kind of a romantic experience. And then we decided to go out after commissioning. And my sister Alice had a fit over that. And we went walking up the steps about 1 o'clock in the morning at the training college after commissioning. But that was the way it was. My mother loved him, but my dad didn't think anybody was good enough for me. I was the apple of his eye. I was the baby of the family. And so he had a longer time to come around, but my mother embraced him right away. She saw the man in him. That was 1939, and we were married in late 42, so that was 3.5 years. And a lot of our session mates were already paired off, and some of them got married like in a year after training. But every time we got together, somehow we would have a fight because Dad wasn't the kind. Back in those days, you didn't call all the time. You couldn't afford it. We wrote lots of letters, and I have some of them, and I've given you girls some of them. He wrote real cute letters, and, well, I don't mean cute, but typical of his vernacular as a kid on the streets of Newburgh. And but all through it all, we always had that feeling that someday we were going to be together, even though we kept breaking up. Every 6 months, we'd get an official correspondence, and then something would happen. So I don't know what that was all about. Might have been my fault. The Army had a Congress coming up before that wedding date, and because of to make it more convenient for families that were getting married, quite a few couples were getting married around that time. They thought if they moved up the weddings, it would be more convenient. So our wedding was moved up from January to November. And still that date, that January 5th, 1943 is on my wedding ring. And when Steve was born, 10 months after we were married, we told him he was almost an illegal baby. Together, we were stationed in Ridgewood, Brooklyn, New York. Alan had already been there before I got there. And he had been stationed in Harlem and Jamaica, and I had been stationed in Ohio, Cincinnati, and then to Yonkers before I was married. I was more fortunate than a lot of other ladies. Dad always allowed me to be home with the children as much as possible. I did the normal things, like take care of the home league and sometimes the girls' groups and things like that. But hopefully I was always there for the kids when they came home from school. And we worked together as a team, Dad and I, and looking back, I enjoyed it. I suppose there were some things I didn't like. When I was a a lieutenant in Cincinnati, I used to have to do the tavern routes, go from tavern to tavern, and I didn't like that very much. But you just learn to do things that at that time were part of the Army, and that was part of your duty. Well, Dad and I used to go up on Knickerbocker Avenue. I had a little portable organ, and we would sing and have a tambourine there for money. And so I remember the lines. You'd see a line forming, and they heard they were selling nylons or something like that. And then I got pregnant, and Easter came around, time to get more money. So I just sat down at that little organ and taught Dad one chord. We sang everything in that chord, no matter what the song was. that song that sounds like, I love coffee, I love tea. And when I think of the nerve we had going out in the public with him not having any musical ability, well, I mean, he played a horn, but not piano. That when I think of maybe you call it courage or idiocy, I don't know what, but we stood out there and sang even without me being able to play the organ. That was something. Well, when I was a lieutenant, I think I got $350. And then when we first married, I think we got $19 a week. We lived in Green Avenue, 1347 Green Avenue. Funny how you can remember old numbers, but I can't remember something yesterday. Yeah, it was Ridgewood section. Yeah. We lived in a third floor railroad flat. You'd go up to the third floor, and there'd be your kitchen, dining room. Then you'd go through what am I pointing at? Through two bedrooms to the living room. So it was weird if you had company, you know.
Why did they call it a railroad flat?
It was laid out, you know, on the third floor, all on one floor.
Oh.
And what they called it.
Rooms were just one
Yeah,
after another.
yeah. Well, before David was born, in 1945, I had a very bad pregnancy and almost lost my life. And Dad was in Brooklyn, and I was in the hospital up near the training college in the Bronx. I just laid there all by myself, hardly any visitors, for 3 weeks. And it hadn't been too long since they started using penicillin, which I believe saved my life. And Dad said that he at one point he was so discouraged, he just said to the Lord, "I give her up if you want to take her, I'll give her up." And then I guess not too long after that he got the word that I was past the crisis. And so we had that time in between, and then when we left for Painesville, Ohio, David was born with spina bifida. And in those days, you never knew anything beforehand. And when I was coming out of my anesthetic, I heard two doctors talking. So I knew something was wrong and found out the baby had an incomplete spine. And we only had him for 6 months. But Steve remembers the funeral. He remembers peeking through the crack to see his brother. He was 4 then. He was a sweet little baby, and of course he couldn't move his limbs or anything, just his arms. And the sad thing was he had the encephalitis, where his head kept getting bigger, and I'd put a little bonnet on him. It wouldn't fit him anymore, and I remember it took my whole hand to hold his head. And he just died in his sleep. And well, back then, nobody said, the doctor never said, you know, we can do this or we can do that. Never gave me any reason to hope that there was like today, they do a lot with spina bifida, a lot of children like Justin. And but I just accepted it as part of.
You had to bring him out. You brought him out to Kensico from Painesville.
I don't know why we ever did that, but in those days, that's all I knew was, that's all I knew was about Kensico. So I take this little casket and Steve with me on the train to New York, and it was such a sad day, a winter day, and I think one person from THQ and Florence, my sister Florence, met us at the train station and took us to Kensico. Just a little tiny band, and then over the hill I saw my DC coming with his daughter, and I was very grateful for that. His name was Colonel Malpas, and that was a difficult trip. Then Dad and I both wanted to make sure that that wouldn't happen again. So Dad, I think, went to the Cleveland Clinic, and I went to a doctor, endocrinologist. And they thought that it was not likely to happen again. So I'm very thankful for my 3 girls, because if I had taken that as my example, I wouldn't have had any more children. And so in 1949, Linda was born. And then in 1955, Kathy was born. 1958, Barbara was born. So I had my boy and 3 girls. We went to Belmar, New Jersey, to the ocean for a few years. Then we went to Sharon, to a Salvation Army camp for 3 years. And then we found Lakeside. We had many happy years at Lakeside, sometimes with the girls' cousins and Salvation Army friends. And it was just a fun time. Dad and Kathy and Barb and I would start off and get halfway there and stop at an A&W for a great big frosty mug of root beer and a hot dog. And that was start of another vacation. So that's mainly the ones I remember during our officership.
When did you know Dad, there was something wrong with Dad?
He was in his 50s. And the first time we really kind of pinpointed it was Linda's graduation. We were driving down to Wilmore, and I forget if we had a flat tire or something, but Dad had a hard time getting his car over to the side, and then he was shaking, and I guess bit by bit, the shaking and then going to the doctor and getting a prognosis. And twice we went from Ohio, we went to Brooklyn to St. Barnabas Hospital, which was a hospital for Parkinson's. And one time they suggested that he could have an operation on his brain, but we didn't take that suggestion. By the time we left our Corps appointment in Cleveland, it was starting to show in his ministry, the shaking, and when he tried to do his sermons and things like that. And then I think the Army recognized that he needed a different type of appointment. But we were in Cleveland 12 years, which was wonderful. And we had a most happy time there, and the girls went way through school there for many years. sometimes we visited family in Ocean Grove, Asbury Park, and my dear sister Florence lived in Queens, Long Island, and Alan died first, and then her husband died about a year and a half later. And I went to New York to talk her into coming to live with me, and she did, and we had 12 happy years together. We did some traveling to Europe, and the girls and I and her and she took girl trips for 10 years to very fun locations and had a very good time together. And we were still not real active in the Corps, but we did go to the Roxborough Corps. 1st of August, it'll be 6 years that I've been in the Simpson house. And for the most part, I've enjoyed it. I have many wonderful friends and fellowships and my sing-along and my volunteer work and a little bit of ministry of visitation and trying to help somebody. I just, mostly I enjoy my days, and I've been treated very well.
So if you had some words of wisdom to give the generations that come after you, what would they be?
I think we forget that we're not here to have a happy life. We're here for a purpose, that God made us to love and honor Him and obey Him. And if we do that, we live within the boundaries that He has set for us, we will have a joyful, maybe not a happy life, but a joyful life. And because of His saving grace, we will enjoy eternal life. So I would just encourage you to love the Lord and serve Him, and like Rick Warren said, it's not about us, it's about Him. Remember that, and just make every day a good day, and when you come in contact with displeasures or unpleasant things, meet them head on, and that's what I don't know how else to put it. Just be a good girl and a good boy, and
Don't go off with strangers on a cruise ship.
yeah, don't.
So what's the key to living a long 93 years?
I don't know that, because I think we often wonder, those of us who live this long, why? Why did you choose me, Lord, and not my friend who died at 60, and her children never got to see her after that? They never got to see the things I've seen. To have 4 wonderful children and 10 wonderful grandchildren, 20 adorable great-grandchildren. I guess that's the reason why I'm glad that the Lord let me live. And I don't think we can question the Lord on that, because it's up to Him how long and how and when and why. And I just want to live every day to His honor and glory, and not my own. And now I'll have my cookie. Is that acceptable?
That was wonderful.
There's so many other things, but that would take years.
It's an Academy Award-winning performance. Especially since she had no warning. I thought that was pretty cool.
Some of those, that's
Are the girls going to be around? 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
Beautiful. Wonderful.
Grandma, look at me.